Evening, everyone. Welcome to August speaker series. Just have a couple of announcements first before I introduce tonight's speaker. The Central Maine Growth Council is overseeing a contract in conjunction with the Maine Department of Economic and Community Development. We are distributing grant funds to those that have been affected by COVID-19 in Kennebec and Somerset County. So for more information, you can reach out to myself or Dave or Garvin to learn how you might be able to apply for that. Pretty easy process, pretty straightforward, we're happy to help. And then on Wednesday, September 18th, we will be hosting a clean tech event in Portland in conjunction with Barry Dunn. And this is specific to clean tech founders who are interested in learning to improve their financial literacy and connect with other professionals in their network. So just to give you an idea of what's going on. I'd like to welcome you to August speaker series. This evening's event is sponsored by the Harold Alpine Institute for Business Innovation at Thomas College, Valley Beverage, and Bricks Co-working in Innovation Space. This is where founders and leaders share advice on how they overcome challenges, capitalize on their target markets, and develop their products, providing you with actionable insights for your own products and processes. This evening's conversation is presented by Jonathan Godbout. In this speaker series, John will discuss his experience in renovating a 10,000 square foot historic building in Cincinnati, Ohio, with the aid of historic tax credits. This session will delve into the renovation process, explore funding strategies, and outline essential considerations for small developers interested in historic tax credit projects.
All right. Good to meet you. I think I know everyone's more tired. So yes. That working? Okay. There you go. So has everyone heard of historic tax credits before? You would know what they are. No? Sure. I mean, the basic concept behind it, historic tax credits are really threefold, right? So one, preserving some sort of heritage and history of a building, creating economic growth in the community, and supporting projects that otherwise could not be completed unless the historic tax credit was in place. It's a way to subsidize the funding, to bring in property back into use that would otherwise be blighted. Or sometimes not blighted, sometimes someone is living in it, but for the most part, it's to bring something that's not being used. So a little bit of background on myself, because even some of you know me, probably don't know some of my background. My first job, I was working for my dad's plumbing and heating business when I was 14. Did that till the time I graduated from Foley College when I was 22. This is my retirement day from plumbing. I took my belt and hung it in the rafters. 18-year-old me. After Colby, I went to go work as a consultant. I worked for a number of Fortune 500 companies, government, got really bored with what I was doing. My wife was starting her PhD program in Cincinnati, and I was working in Cincinnati and traveling to DC like every 2 weeks. Really not enjoying the consultant life. Thankfully, our fellow Colby grads, John and Inara, were living in Cincinnati, and we started doing a renovation project at our house. And through that process, John started talking about his own project where he was rehabilitating a building. And he asked me, hey, you should go check it out. There's a bunch of resources available. I'm using these historic tax credits. It's covering like 30 or 40% of the cost. It's a really good opportunity. You should try to jump on this. And so I went to a couple developer sessions, right? These are for small developers, not for big developers, single building units. And I met Eric, my business partner, who still lives in Cincinnati. He's also our property manager. And Eric and I started looking through properties. We signed a disclosure agreement with the land bank, and I started walking around and trying to find out what was going to meet what we wanted to do. Cincinnati had a lot of right-of properties. This was back in 2014. From there, one thing I just want to kind of stress, for anyone who's considered these projects, particularly for young professionals, was that this was kind of something that I did where I really didn't know much about going in. But it actually led to my leaving IBM. I went to go do it for a bunch of startups, and it was really the thing that gave me confidence to do it. And I met this guy, Ronald, in the process. We started a tech company in Kenya where I was going probably for about 3 or 4 years. I was going to Africa all the time. So big catalyst for that. And today I'm, for those of you, most of you know that I work at Prospector. It's a tech startup. I run out of that office back there. I also help rep some construction stuff locally. Get my hands in a few different things, but I would say the experience of going through this development taught me a lot, but it also taught me how to multitask and do a lot of different things. And if you're ever thinking about doing something, definitely don't get too scared on the surface. Take a deeper dive and look, and take some time. Don't worry about how long it's gonna take you. Sometimes it takes a while to get there. It took us 5 years to get the building out there, so. But you're here to learn about tax credits, so let's talk about them. So what qualifies as a historic tax credit project? So number one, it needs to either be on the National Historic Register with the federal government, or it needs to be in a historic district that's been designated for economic growth. In Cincinnati, our building was both on the National Registrar and it was in a historic district called Over the Rhine, which we'll talk a little bit about more of that. Has to be a substantial investment. So the threshold is $5,000. You must be doing at least $5,000 of rehabilitation expenditures to qualify. Standards. The Department of the Interior sets the baseline standards for the federal tax credits, and then each state has its own tax office that will set their own sort of standards about historic rehabilitation. They vary by state. For instance, when I was in Ohio, our standard at the state level were well in excess of what the federal was. And so what would happen is they basically were deferring everything to the state to do the work. But if you go to a different state, I don't know maybe enough about the historic tax credits here, but I'm guessing it's a similar type situation where they're more stringent because they're usually closer to the actual historic relevance of the project. And then the last aspect, which is very important, is it needs to be depreciable. It's a fancy word of saying it needs to create economic value. It's not a place, it can't be a single family home you live in, right? You can rehabilitate it and you can rent it to someone else. Or you can do a multi-unit, but it has to be creating some sort of economic value. It doesn't have to be a building, it can be a park, it can be a church, but it has to be generating some sort of income over at least a 5-year period. Over the Rhine. So I love history. So just indulge me a little bit here, but we're going to do a little history of Over the Rhine. I think it's got a lot of parallels to Waterville. And we're going to talk about swine, steins, and streams. Sorry. So before I get started, raise your hands. Map on the left, map on the right. Who thinks the map on the left is Cincinnati? Who thinks the map on the right is Cincinnati? Do left side first. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the right is to confirm. So, geographically speaking, it's really not that dissimilar, right, from Waterville, if you think about it, right? Maybe a little more north, but in a lot of ways, there's a lot of similarities. River cities, right? Big component of the economy of both places. Now, second history question. Does anybody know who the Order of Cincinnati is about? No. Okay. Anybody Roman history? No? Okay.
Well, Cincinnati was Roman.
Yeah. Right, correct. So Cincinnati comes from Cincinnatus, and Cincinnatus was this famous Roman, we'll call him Roman general. And in times of emergency, Cincinnatus was called in from his farm. He came and led the army, saved Rome from something. And then the big thing about it was he was a dictator for a temporary amount of time, and he gave his power back to the Senate. So when George Washington was elected president, and he elected to not serve a life term that was not given in the United States when we first formed the Constitution, him giving things back was thought of as being Cincinnatus. So George Washington's nickname was the American Cincinnatus. There was a league of generals after the Revolutionary War called the Order of the Cincinnatus, who resettled in the Ohio River Valley. This is Cincinnatus himself. And so they dubbed the city Cincinnati after George Washington, but really after Cincinnatus. And to this day, they have a statue there of Cincinnatus picking up the plow and going back to work. It's a sign of doing civic duty, but giving power back to the people. From 1825 to 1845, there was a canal that was constructed called the Miami and Erie Canal, went from Cincinnati all the way to the Great Lakes. The importance of this canal was it connected the Great Lakes to the Ohio River, which is connected to the Mississippi River, which is connected to the Missouri River. So it was the way in which the Great Lakes were connected together. This led to Cincinnati being called Porkopolis. It became like the center of pork production up until 1850. Then from 1850 through about 1900, there was a massive amount of German immigration, mostly in the light of the revolutions of 1848. Since that's when the neighborhood over the Rhine came to be, over the Rhine was over the river, so over the canal. And this district in Cincinnati, over the Rhine, was the second most populated neighborhood in the country after Lower Manhattan in 1900. 1900 hits, anybody? There was a canal that was built, not a canal, they reversed the Chicago River into the Illinois, which effectively did replace Cincinnati as the place where most of the trade was flowing through. This had a huge economic impact. And then leading into the 1920s and 1940s, Cincinnati up to this point over the Rhine was also the densest brewery production neighborhood in the world, in the country. Brewery production went through the floor, obviously, can't produce it anymore. And one thing I want to point out is in the lead up to Prohibition, these are what we call the beer tunnels. So in Cincinnati, before Prohibition got implemented, you could not brew, you could not bottle inside the same building. So what they did is they would buy one building and they would put the bottle in there and they put the brewing on the other and they'd run pipes underneath. That's how they would bottle beer. And so when we look at our building, we actually have one of these tunnels below. And does anybody know who this guy is? Anybody read the Great Gatsby? Yeah. It's George Remus. He was the inspiration for the Great Gatsby. He used to have these famous parties where he would invite people, and at the end, he would give the men cars and the women diamond necklaces. Then in the 1940s to the 1980s, a lot of things happened. There was post-World War II white flight. We had the race riots of the 1960s. The formation of I-71 and I-75, which took out massive parts of the over the Rhine neighborhood and led to massive depopulation. So at this point, Cincinnati in 1900 was about 60,000 people in over the Rhine neighborhood. It went down to about 15 to 20 around this time. And then it got even worse. There was a shooting of Timothy Thomas in 2001. And this brought after that race riot, the population of this neighborhood actually went down to 5,000 from 60,000. And then I just want you to pay attention to that right there. This is a very iconic photo of the race riots from 2001. Bubbles, the little launch ramp. Then in 2010, 2020, a nonprofit got stood up called 3CDC. They applied for something called a new market tax credit. This is usually bundled with historic tax credits, but it's meant to take entire neighborhoods or entire cities. Usually it's in the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars for redevelopment. And through this, they did about 1.4 million, 192 buildings and 1,500 residential units. So as we were planning our work, this was what we were looking at. We saw what they were doing. And we wanted to find a building that was amongst it. They were also the ones administering the land bank. So Cincinnati had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of vacant buildings. And I will say today, Cincinnati, the population is never going to get to 60,000 again in this neighborhood. That was people living very tight, but it's up around 35,000 people. So it's been a massive effort. Lots of challenges with how to manage balanced development and gentrification. It's an ongoing process. So what's the project? So this is our building, 1737 Vine. It was built in 1850. So the same year the canal was finished. It was last occupied when we got it in 2003. 4 floors, 7 units, 3,500 square feet for commercial states and 10,500 for all the apartments. Just a brief look. I have a little diagram I'm going to go through to show some photos more into it a little bit. Any guesses on how much I paid for it? What? Low. How much? Higher than 35. Close. 15. $15,000. And that's because it was in the land bank. A big part of the redevelopment that Cincinnati took, it was that they wanted to get developers properties that could prove it was economically viable. They sold it to me for 15 because my business partner and I came up with a plan about how we could finance it. They wouldn't have done that otherwise. And they had a big program on this for a lot of local developers. So, another aspect when we're looking at it, so this is larger Cincinnati, this is over the Rhine district I'm talking about. At the time of acquisition, this is the central business district. This is the University of Cincinnati, it's a 60,000 person school. They were building this right here, which is a streetcar. Great thing about streetcars, they don't move, right? When you have a bus line, the bus lines move. And so we knew that that streetcar was always going to be there. And then we also knew Finley Market, which is basically Cincinnati's Faneuil Hall, was about 100 yards from the building. So we saw a lot of potential. We were still on the upper end now because what was happening was this part was going through massive redevelopment. This is the southern part of OCR. And this is what's called the Brewery District up here. It was not going through the same. And a large part of that is this is a really wide street. So they're fighting hard at the time when we acquired to really develop up that way, with the exception of the Finley Market area. So for us, when we were pitching this, our big thing was we want to be the thing that kind of guides more people up here. And I think it's worked, but it's been a job. So this is Finley Market. So the streetcar that's now in production. So how did it look? This is the exterior when we got it, saw that. But do you remember the photo in 2001? Can you see this?
Oh.
That's bubbles. So it was the laundromat that was there. So a big part when we started doing this was to hire folks in neighborhoods. When we started doing development, a big thing that would happen was they would be redeveloping the properties. And all the construction companies were coming from the suburbs. And it was inflating prices, but it was also not really creating economic opportunity for those in the community. So we couldn't hire electricians locally, there just wasn't companies or plumbers. But for demolition and basic work, we were able to do that, which was a big part of our redevelopment plan, but also a big part of us helping to secure the building and create some, because when we actually first bought this, someone was dealing drugs out of the door of our building. He would like open up the side and stand in the back and so a lot of work to do this, and also as they're developing, trying to find ways to create affordable housing so that it wasn't a really high-end apartment. We wanted something that was more affordable for the average person. This is one of those tunnels. Is under our building. Those are those beer tunnels. Hopefully you can follow my arrow as we go around the building. I didn't do it in order. So this is the inside of Bubbles, the laundromat. It's pretty rough shape. You got it. Stairwell. This actually, my wife and I, we were gonna live in this unit. And this is when we first walked in. Someone was living in here for probably, I don't know, probably about five or 6 years or so. I'd say the trash. This is one of the light areas. If you, I wish I would have gotten from the other side, but the other side of this was about 2 or 3 feet high of trash. And what was happening was someone was living on the second floor and just throwing their stuff down here, and it accumulated over time. So that was a big cleanup job. This is one of our units on the side. This is one of the same little doorways looking out. See quite a bit of work. Bottom unit, right? Floor gone, had to redo the walls. There's a lot of work. Had to get rid of all the spray paint. It was quite a difficult task. So it was a challenging problem. We knew going in, we paid 15, but we knew it was going to cost us $2 million to put it into production.
What was the total redevelopment budget?
Can I go to that next? Okay. So I just want to, let's talk about resources first that we use. So one, historic tax credits, number one, right? It financed about 30 to 40% of our project with historic tax credits. That's how we made that work. Number two, City of Cincinnati got some friends, and we pay taxes for the next, I guess we have 6 more years left at our pre-development value. So we're paying not at yeah. So really big advantage when you're paying taxes on 15 versus $1 million. Property acquisition, 3CDC dealt with a lot of the legal stuff. They buttoned up the buildings. They kind of got it a little ready. Obviously, they're not to the point where we didn't have to clean stuff out, but it did quite a bit for us. But the thing that I'm most appreciative is this OTR community council. So OTR, the neighborhood had a community council. They would do things like zoning, right? They would make decisions about what could happen in the neighborhood, you know, those kind of things. And the city council would defer to them. But more importantly, what they would do is they would do workshops where you could walk people's projects. They brought people in to teach you how to financially model a project. They introduced you to tax credit consultants. They introduced you to people that were familiar with the projects and how to deal with it. It was a huge help, and it's actually how I met my business partner, Eric. And then Cincinnati Development Fund. So Cincinnati has a lending facility that specifically their mission is to redevelop properties in Cincinnati. And they're who we got our funding from, and they got really creative. Where they gave us actually a two-stage loan to work with our tax credit, which I'll explain a little more when we get through the problem. So what did the path look like? Project planning, nothing. It was just my sweat equity labor, being an artist, into the paying for that. Acquisition, 15,000. Loan application to CDF was 5,000. Tax credits, 3.5. I would recommend spending a lot more. I would not do it on my own again. Definitely is the reason why we failed our application. So if you can find someone to do the tax credit application for you, just be wary because some of them will charge you percentages. You really want to get a flat fee when you're doing that. Permits and detailed design, 52,000, and rehab, $1.2 million. A lot. It was scary. And then occupancy, $55,000, just kind of giving all the things back and ready to go. So how do we do that, right? How do we pay for all these things? The equity investment was first. So I took some of my 401k money out, put about 30,000 in, and I was lucky enough to have some family that were willing to take it back. And that was our equity financing, $330,000. You'll notice here that we get the tax credits, right? Over there, and then we get a construction loan. So the thing about a tax credit is you get 20% from the federal and you get 25% from the state. Problem is, those are tax credits against income. I don't make $1 million. I don't make $200,000. So what do you have to do? You actually have to go and find someone who will be what's called monetized. So essentially what you're doing, you're saying, they give you cash now, and then we will give you, they'll get to use the tax credit later, right? And what they do is they give you a big haircut. I was fortunate enough where, you know, we were able to get it to a reasonable point. So about 80 cents in the dollar is what we were getting. The good thing about state tax credits though, is they're not technically tax credits. They're more like tax subsidies. So let's say you get a tax credit for $100,000 and your annual income liability is only, you know, let's say the tax credit is 200, let's say your liability is something like $10,000. You'll get a $90,000 check. Well, the problem with that though is don't forget that the federal government's going to tax you. So it's another thing you have to take into account. But just know that if you are applying for historic tax credits, is that you have to assume that you're only going to get to put the cash into the project of about 70 to 80 cents in the net, right? Because someone's going to have to absorb it unless you have enough wealth where you think you can absorb it and realize it. And then deferred developer fees. So normally you pay a developer to coordinate things. We did not do that. We just took that out. We had a budget for it. And then we had a construction loan of about $750,000, which is what we're currently servicing. But the creative thing is we had to get a loan to convert this because we needed cash up front. Even though we got good amount of pennies on the dollar for our tax credits, we still needed a way to actually get the cash to use in the project. So CDF got created and they created a two-stage loan for us. So one loan was tied to the tax credits, so that as soon as we got the tax credits, that's when we had to pay our principal. So that helped a lot. If they didn't do that, I don't think many conventional banks would do that. We would have had to carry that. And I don't think that we would have been able to find someone to finance it. So that was a big part of making this possible. What does it look like? So it's not as bad as you think. We'll say that. So there's really three parts. The first part is certify and ownership. So this is just a really basic application. It's only a few pages long, but you basically got to prove you have ownership of deed. There's no liens, and it's on the registry. That's really the basics. The most cumbersome part is part two. Here you need to put your plans together. You need to do a photo key. You need a financial model. You need to show job creation numbers. You have to do a lot of different things. And so we failed our first time with this, so we didn't get to our second time. And it's competitive at the state level. So that was the big reason why we didn't get it the first time, because so many people were doing projects. And I think it's competitive in Maine too, if I'm not mistaken. And then three is at the end of the project, they send someone from state capital office and they have to come validate. And actually, we had a couple things that didn't validate. It was the middle of COVID and further delayed us getting our final bid. This is just kind of an overview of all the different things that go into your section two, right? Again, 25% from the state, 20% from the federal. Typically multiple rounds. There was two rounds a year, so it'd be a fall and a spring. And it's reviewed by the state park office, right? And just things to consider, you need to adhere by the standards. Monetize the credits is a big thing. You have to figure out how you're going to turn that to cash. It's not always a straight process. And then economic feasibility, and then detailed documentation on estimates. They really want to know that you can actually do this. You need to have qualified contracting quotes to support. This is the photo key. So each one of these numbers you see here, they get pinned where you get before and after diagrams of what you're going to do. We take the pictures, and then when they go back, they take pictures again at the same spots to that. This is an example of the financial model that we did, just to kind of give a sense of what they're expecting, right? They want to know that it's cash flow positive, that you can make this work, and you're going to hold on to the property. So how does it look? So this is the exterior. This is this is the mirror image of that one that was looking out before.
Do you have to replace many windows?
Oh, so actually, that's another good point. Other thing to consider when you're doing these projects is always count broken windows, because in historic rehab, it is by far the biggest expense. And so that's the reason we chose this building, is it had a lot of unbroken windows. And it actually saved us a ton of cost. This is where all that trash was. You can see this is where the stairs come down, yeah. And then lastly, we recently found out, the city hires muralists to do murals around Cincinnati. And this muralist, so Cincinnati's a covered cost, it's like $80,000. And this artist is gonna be doing one in our building in the coming 6 months. So we're excited about that. Yeah, we applied for it, so we're excited, and it's gonna time right, because we actually have to wait for our historic period, which is 5 years before we can do it. So my hope is that they'll do something that incorporates bubbles into it, because it's a big part of what we can. There's been a lot of interest in trying to preserve that, because it was a very big community close to fill sites.
Yeah.
So,
Did you hire a consultant? Do you work with a consultant through this whole process?
no, so I
You
went.
tried to do you did it all yourself?
Yeah, so my business partner and I, we had some people that we talked to. We have like a lawyer that we will talk to, but for the most part, we're going through it a lot of it ourselves.
You've been working with the National Park Service?
Well, you have to have an accredited architect, so the architect we hired would do a lot of the specific historic aspects. That's,
Including all the paperwork and
Yeah.
part ones and part twos?
yeah. So we were doing the paperwork ourselves, but with the architect was in charge of maintaining the drawings and maintaining the pictures, whereas we were ourselves putting together a lot of the economic type stuff, the narratives, those kind of things, where we had gotten a bunch of examples from other successful applications where we were able to kind of put that together. Again, that's why those workshops were so valuable to us, because they were like, I don't know that without that knowledge base of that network, we would have been able to do it, because there were so many people just willing to help. And because there was so many redevelopment going on for small buildings at the time, everyone was kind of supportive of one another. Because if my building comes online, your building comes online, it's good for all of us, right? It's one of those things where the more buildings come online, the better for everyone. So yeah, that's how they.
How about your how about your council? Basically, I'm sure you had an experienced council who would be familiar with using historical tax credits.
Yeah.
As well as your construction.
We had to actually fire our first construction firm, which was a painful process that we thought was good because we knew they had done a couple of historic projects. And actually, we went with a less experienced one, and that's one of the major reasons. It was our storefront. That we got dinged on in our final application, where one of our contractors hadn't done something right. So it's, I would say we did have our carpenters were usually, and were the ones who had done historic projects before, but it is one where you definitely want to find someone that's got experience with it, particularly if there's a lot of plaster work. That's the stuff that's really complex. Like there were some, not in our building, but there were some really ornate plasters that you have to preserve. And if someone is not experienced with that, that can be quite challenging. But trim and doorways is the big one.
How about windows?
Windows, that was the big thing why we chose this building. There weren't a lot of windows to replace, because if you do replace a window, it's about $1,500 to $2,000 a window. Because you have to do, I don't know how they got away with it here. They must have been broken windows.
They spend millions of dollars on windows.
They don't have, you normally have to have the pulleys. There's no pulleys in them. So when you do historic windows, they force you to put the old, I don't know if you know those like old rope pulleys inside of them. And so that would be really expensive, the custom cut glass, all that stuff. And so every time we would walk a building, it was count the windows. We know that that's gonna set one of our build costs for what it's gonna take to do the property.
What was the kind of wonkiest or weirdest thing that you had to preserve? Was there like a clock in the hallway or anything like that? Anything particularly unique that was
The storefront,
historical?
the storefront was, we had some disagreements on it because they switched our inspector off on us, and one inspector said yes and one said no. Yeah. That was a problem. So the one guy left the parks office, the new one came in, the new one that came in and said, well, that guy should have never approved that you did that. And he said, I don't care if he did it, you have to fix it. And that was a painful one.
So indicated what the first one?
Yeah, yeah. And I was like, I would say $5,000 or $10,000 of work to do that. It's not cheap. But they're big on storefronts, they're big on windows, big on trim. Those are the big things I noticed going through the process. I would say just big thing, be patient if you ever want to buy one of these. I also, I think I was talking to Brett earlier about this, it's like, you actually also have to have an asset mindset, not a cash flow asset, not a cash flow mindset, meaning that you can't think of it as something that's gonna give you cash in the near term. It's gotta be something that's gonna create asset value long term, because it's painful and it takes time. So just, I would say that's one of the big things for us, because now that our building is valued close to $1 million.
In Cincinnati or in the state of Ohio, did they give you any benefit for affordable housing?
So we didn't use it, just because of most of the application process, and because we knew that we could get at like 80 AMI and still rent, and we were working at a lower cost. So we were doing, I think we did something like 110 per square foot, and 3CDC was doing like 160, 170.
I'm sorry.
3CDC, the development firm, they were spending 160, 170, we were paying 110. There was a lot of inflated numbers of like how much it was costing to rehab. And so that was our finishes. I think they look nice, but they're not quite as nice as, like, we were able to find some ways to cut
In the
costs.
state of Maine, basically, if you're at 80% or below 80% AMI, basically, the state kicks up another 10% on the tax credits. Basically, you get 35 on the tax credits from the state and 20 from the federal government.
I would like that. But it was, yeah, it was not, they were not making a straightforward process in Ohio. Ohio is also it's a laissez-faire jurisdiction in some respects, I would say. I learned a lot of, I worked for my dad as a plumber. There were just things that pass in code in Ohio that would never pass in Maine. It was amazing, like things like exterior water pipes and walls. But
So you had a sprinkler?
what? Yeah, $80,000, another big one. That was a painful one. And that's also, right now, we're actually in the process of getting our liquor license so that we can put a restaurant on the bottom. We're occupied for the 7 units above, but our restaurant spaces or retail space, whatever it's used for, is white boxed. It just means that it's ready for someone to come in and make how they want.
Any incentives or programs to the business users or anything you were able to convey onto the let's say, and business user?
For the state, like for
Or
the
the
current.
restaurant or?
Yeah, so we'll probably split we'll probably hold on to the liquor license and as a result, probably take a minor stake in whatever that business is. And then we'll probably split cost of like implementation, depending on how that looks. There's a couple interested ones, but we gotta get that liquor license first. Cincinnati is one of those districts where they're really trying to limit the liquor licenses. And so like getting them is not a straightforward process because they don't want too many concentrated in certain areas. And we actually had to create like what they call a whole new entertainment district in order for us to get granted one. And so I'm actually going through a background check with the state right now to get that online. And lastly, build relationships. Eric is like best friends with city council and the city planner. Like, he goes to see them probably once a month. And that during the process and even now helps us a lot. And Eric is probably gonna run for city council in Cincinnati at some point, I imagine. That's why I picked him, not why I picked him, he's a good friend and everything, but he's very politically savvy in that regard.
Did the pandemic have any effect on how you were able to rent out and keep tenants in the building?
So we went into occupancy at the start of the pandemic. So that was a challenge. So we spent our first year for about 50% occupancy. On top of that, Eric was in Hawaii because his wife took up one of those jobs to, you know, when all the doctors are going to random places, she went to Hawaii to go be a doctor there, and that also made things challenging. But yeah, it got better over time. I would say by 2022, things got stable, and we use something called Door Loop now, which is just like a software, and our tenants send in a check every month, and Eric goes, checks in, and he does maintenance, those kind of things. But yeah, it was a little sad because we thought we were gonna live in there's one unit that's essentially 3 stories. And we were gonna redevelop that for us to live in. So, we're not leaving Cincinnati.
This obviously wasn't in the opportunity zone, and or did the redevelopment utilize or in the budding districts, qualified opportunity zones at all?
Oh, it was a new market tax credit zone, right? So that money had already been coming in for those purposes. And I think that's probably also part of the reason why they can sell us the property so cheap. I will say Cincinnati has a really good land bank. That was just one thing they did really well. That really helped out.
How difficult was it to use the new market tax credits? I've heard it's really much more difficult than working with the.
Yeah, we didn't use them, so there's a group called, the 3CDC is the big one, and then another group called Model Group, which basically piggybacks off them. They have like whole staffs of people. All they do is like LIHTC grants and new market tax credit paperwork, and that's what they do. And that's the big reason why as a small developer, it's really hard to use more than like one thing, because just the paperwork requirements of the owner.
Yeah, our council recommended not to use it.
Yeah, you need a lot of money. It needs to be a lot for.
I think it has to be over at least 8 to 10 million, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it takes a lot of planning. And I think, you know, you have to have, it's a lot. It's just, that was one thing that we're appreciative. We were able to ride the benefits of it because of everything that was going on, but it was quite challenging.
Maybe just like an interpersonal question, so admire all your work, Jonathan, and meanwhile, you've been running a very successful startup here in downtown Waterville, prospector. What skills have been transferable learning lessons from entrepreneurship into the developing, you know, a tech platform and developing a neighborhood?
So what'd you say the other day? Find truth, right? So when chaos comes, find truth. I thought that stuck with me, which is just like, I would say like I think I compartmentalize my different things because I just, sometimes I get overwhelmed, and my wife tell you that she probably bears the brunt of that, so I don't do it publicly, but the stress of it all, because if you're dealing with lots of stuff at once, but I would say like dealing with a job site, dealing with like contractors and stuff. Although it was really nice to be back on one, I missed that, which is really why it's nice to work with Bretton on some stuff, but yeah.
when are you gonna do the project in the water?
On the right incentive.
Finance.
Do you have a business on the first floor of the building?
Here,
Is there in the commercial space?
not yet, that's what we're, right now, we need the liquor license before we can have a restaurant with it, so the state issue will own the liquor license, right, so that way. If a business does go under, if it goes in there, we get to keep it and can find some more easily, because it's so hard to get those liquor licenses. And to be economically viable as a restaurant, you need to have it.
Oh, sorry.
No, so are you bringing in, did you start the restaurant yourself from scratch, or did you bring in somebody else?
No, there's no restaurant there yet.
Oh,
So we're recruiting restaurateurs, but we want to hold a liquor license ourselves, just because. One, it's security for us to rent things going forward, because if the restaurant owner gets the liquor license, then if they leave that liquor license, it's gone, and the space loses its economic value. And the big thing about it when we plan the project though, and this is another part about if you're doing mixed use and historic, is plan your economic model where you don't need that commercial space. And that's entirely, we planned our whole economic model where we knew we could rent things and we would make enough buy to cover our debt service. And that once we got the restaurant, we knew that was the thing that would pay us. So Eric and I haven't taken a single cash payment out of the business until that's happened. And that's
so the residential units essentially covered the cash flow of the
maintenance and debt service. Yeah,
and then essentially the commercial was very essentially.
essentially, yes. And we've really kept our rental rates down, which is something we're proud of, so we're gonna try to continue to do that, because we have. Really, some of the units are fairly small, one's like 800 square feet, so it's a little small, and so we kept that one below 1,000, which for Cincinnati is pretty low, so we're really trying to keep them as low as we can.
What else is in the neighborhood where the abutting buildings, where the other commercial users on the block?
Yeah, so now there's more. When we were doing this, there was nothing. We were, like I said, there's a park off the street from us. It was a pretty common place where people were dealing, like on one side of the fence. So we knew that going in, and that was a big part of the way that we were pitching the project, is that we wanted it to be a way to create some activity in the area. But 200 yards away is Finley Market, which is essentially Cincinnati's family hall. But it kind of sits in an island amongst everything else, or not anymore, it doesn't now. Now it's got restaurants around it. And 3CDC and Model Group have now since moved up some of their development. But I would say we are sort of in one of the more lower income parts of the neighborhood. So there's also an effort by the council to try to maintain affordable housing in and around us. And there's a group that we worked with we'd go to their fundraisers and stuff and give them some money, that we're doing like rent to own schemes. And a couple like a block or two down, and so that was like a big thing about trying to find ways to redevelop and rent to own. It's hard, it's really hard to get it to work, but just different concepts people are trying. Housing space is just very difficult, right?
So I noticed a lot of conversation around like the process around documentation with different applications. Is there a way, or have you thought about how you leverage like, generative AI to like fill that stuff out? So that way you don't have to give these people all the money for the historical tax credit.
Well, a lot of it's the plans. And that's the hard part, to like really do that. Cause you can geotag photos on your phone pretty easily.
You mentioned council, it's like that's automated, right? All of these,
Yeah, there are things where you need some advice, right? And also like. It's a human review process, right? It's a score. So when you do the state tax credit process, they give you a score and they compare you to everyone else. And then they say, everyone above this line, you get it. Everyone below that line, you don't get it. Come back and apply again. And that's a human reviewing that.
so you can't queue up the paperwork.
Yeah, the federal one you can get still, like you can still get a certain point level to certify, but if you want that state one, it's a competitive process. And funny enough, in Ohio, one of the things that gives you points is not using the full 25%. So we actually only requested 22% to get the extra points to make sure we got our credit.
And how'd you learn that?
By losing around and then learning other people over there.
Got it.
Did the city require you to have parking, with your residential units?
They did not require, but part of that is also because we are surrounded by blight. So, we did want parking, so we have 4 parking spots that are behind the building now.
But you weren't required.
They would probably require it now. But at the time, they wouldn't, because of the neighborhood development that's gone on. At the time, there was just so many unoccupied buildings around us that was not a cause for concern for them. They were more interested in just getting things occupied.
What kind of planning approvals does the product require?
I mean, general occupancy permits, general, but also like we would coordinate with the planner's office before we did our abatement request. Just to make sure we got things rubber stamped. And so there was a lot of preparing for that. And we were really working hard with them on the narrative, like of what we saw, because, let me see if there's a map in here, right?
You know, great, by the way.
Thank you. So the theory of change, hard to see, but you see this road right here? So there wasn't very much that was developed here and here, and there had started to be some stuff that had been reoccupied over here, and the market was here. So our theory going to the bank and going to the planner's office is, if we can put a building here, and also we'll say that Rothenberg Prep down here, this is the school, right? This redevelopment of this area was a way to bridge that gap, because there was development over here, and we said, okay, well, if we put something here, this is gonna create some economic activity that can help with redevelopment efforts. So that was part of the theory. I would say it's come along, it's taken slower than we thought it would, but it definitely, it's been better. Part of the thing that was a surprise was, the park right here, and this got shut for like a year. And so that caused everyone that was hanging out in that park to hang out here. And so there was just a lot of like community tension type issues. We've had shootings outside the building, not anymore, but early on. So it's just trying to manage that, trying to manage community engagement as well, trying to manage diverse tenant base as well. It's a big thing.
Question, how much do you have to pay to move the tax credits? Like what percentage of tax credits just go to moving them to somebody, or a finder's fee for somebody with it?
It's more like what they are asking for. It's not, the federal government is not necessarily taking a moving fee, so usually it'll be 75 to 80 cents. I've heard some was like at 60 cents. Like you get 60 cents for giving over $1.
Got it, so is there a secondary market that moves those? Okay, and then you'll pay 35% of that dollar. To go with it.
Yeah, well, they're gonna give you the money back and take the whole of the tax
Got it.
credit, but they're usually wealthy out-of-state individuals that
Gotcha.
have a tax liability that they can use it against.
Any last questions for John?
Not for the big part.
No, it's not. It's not, like I said before, don't go into it expecting cash flow immediately. Think about it. I think about it as my retirement. If I can sell it, it's enough.
But you have to hold this for at least 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'll hold it for a decade, I think, or more, I'm expecting, so. It's also just, I don't know, I grew up in Biddeford. And I saw what depopulation looked like, and I haven't got to be there when all the redevelopment happened, and this was kind of my way to maybe get involved in that without being here, and until we moved back in home. My wife and I moved back here in 2019. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone for joining us. This conversation has been recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel for later viewing. I'd just like to give another thank you to our sponsors, Bricks Co-working and Innovation Space, Valley Beverage, and Harold Alphon Institute for Business Innovation at Thomas College. Have a wonderful rest of your week.